I was wondering if you could talk about separation and union in the quest, and I guess the effects of both of those and the fruits, if any, of both separation and union.
It takes a long time to, not always, but it takes a long time to create a relationship that has intense emotions in it. It's usually something that people often experience in romantic relationships, that, you know, you're single, alone, minding your own business, your life is going relatively okay. There is no sense of grief or loss about you. Your life is comfortable. And someone catches your eye. And it's something that someone like Jean-Paul Sartre would say, that they steal you from you, that there is really nothing missing in your life, but all of a sudden you run into someone or you run into something, and they begin to hold part of you within them. And as you walk away, you feel as if you have left part of yourself behind. And so you begin to pursue them, you know. And as you spend more time with this thing, both in terms of actual time with the thing as well as imaginative time, that you daydream about them, you fantasize about them, and little by little you create a story, you create history, and as this relationship becomes more strong, more intense, that thing holds more of you in it, and you have less of you to yourself. Now, prior to this time, again, there are no pangs of separation. You don't really feel much. You don't miss anything. And so, as this thing holds more of you, and as you held more of yourself to yourself, you realize that whenever you're not around this particular thing or this particular person, a big chunk of you is missing. and you try to look for it, find it in other things. Maybe you want to watch a movie to just forget. Maybe you have a conversation. And so this idea of separation happens only when you've been exposed to something, like to another person. And let's just call it you fall in love. And one of the things that love does is that it really does give you a good amount of value. And when it's not around, it takes that value away. And this value comes in terms of the way you think about things. It comes in the way of you feeling intensely about yourself, about this other person, about life. Just everything changes. And so I suppose initially you don't really feel the pangs of separation, because as long as you're with this person, there is union, there is ecstasy, even if the person isn't there. But you know, at any time you could go to them, at any time you could call them, at any time you could hear their voice. Even though physical separation is quite painful, the very fact that once in a while you can hear their voice, that in itself is like an oasis. It brings a sense of comfort. And you don't grieve as much. You don't feel the sense of loss as much. Also, depending on how wrapped up you are with this other person. And when this person is not around you, there is a good part of you that feels dead. And like any funeral service, you go there because someone very close to you has passed away. And you really do feel a sense of loss. It's a great sense of loss. And you kind of feel lost. You're grieving. And sometimes people grieve passively and sometimes people grieve actively, in the sense that they're enraged. They become really, really angry. You know, in union, you really do feel as if you're in paradise. It's like so much of life gets beautified. You, for the first time, you feel whole. And all those 7 deadly sins, you know, greed and lust, for other things, not so much for the person you're with and the person that you want. Everything disappears. There is such a feeling of content. It's something I've always believed, which is, you know, when you fall in love, and when that love takes a physical form, and in that physical form there is a great amount of physicality, you know, intimacy. It's really the best time to die, because you die in such a fulfilled way. everything about you that's human just washes away. You know, our time with Hussein was interesting in the sense that not only did I miss Hussein when he wasn't around, what I also missed was these ideas are so potent, you know, they really offer you this promised land. You just have no idea where to go. You have no idea what to do. They really do make you more than human, and you expect so much from yourself, and you want so much from yourself, and you do so much for other people. And these ideas push you to look for something, and you don't really know what it is that you're looking for, but you're looking for it nevertheless. And so you realize you're being kind of assaulted by two fronts. The first front is there's a guy you're working with, and there's a guy you like, and there's a guy you love. And when you go to his house, there is comfort, there is solace, there is unification of sorts. You sit there, you listen, you hear, you feel. And once in a while, you know, the wheels in your brain begin to kind of turn, and you begin to think about this and that a little bit. And then when he opens his mouth and, you know, talks about these ideas, it really, if you happen to be in the right place, and when you're in love, you're always in the right place. You know, it's so inspiring. You're kind of like lifted out of your body, and you're just pushed into a different realm. And you don't think about, you know, how your drive home is going to be, or how you're going to be when you go home to rest your body, or how your morning is going to be when you wake up in bed, only to come to realize that you've returned back to life, and life has nothing to offer you. And you long to go back to Hussein's house, but, you know, Hussein has a life, and you don't want to seem so needy. And when you try to kind of man it up and say, no, I'll be okay, when in fact you're just shattered on the inside. Moments of unity, they are rare. I'm not talking about like going to Hussein's house, sitting for a few hours. These ideas push you towards something, and you have no idea what they are. But there is this great sense of loss. And you don't know what you've lost. And you don't know where you have to go to look for it. You don't want to be sad, but you are. You don't want to be depressed, but you are. You don't want to be angry, but you are. You don't want to blame your husband or your wife for your condition, but you know, you just don't know who else to beat up. You know, you don't have the strength to beat yourself up, because you do that on a daily basis, every hour. You want someone to understand you, to hold you, but everybody feels such a stranger. You know, it really is like you've gone to your own funeral. Nothing tastes good. Nothing feels good. You know, a few years back when there were these two guys, Chris and Brian. And I was doing a lot of backyard work. They would like come here at 9 in the morning and they would work like a mule, you know, until 2, 3. And then of course I would head to class and they would come to the class later on, and I would always tell them, you know, go home and rest your bodies. But if you want to come back here tomorrow, you can, just let me know. And I would think that, you know, they're going to have their lunch, they're going to go home, they're going to rest. Maybe they're going to think about, you know, I went to this guy's house, I worked for 5, 6 hours, what am I, crazy? Maybe I should clean my own house or wash my own car or get a second job, make some more money. Or just rest, have a good time with life, you know. But as they're leaving, they would look at me and say, well, do you mind if you come here tomorrow again? And of course my answer was no. You know, you guys are always welcome. And it wasn't so much about me needing their bodies here so they can, you know, help me with the backyard. Because I remember how it felt to be a student. But I really did want to be around Hussein all the time, and without him I kind of felt lost. There is no feeling of separation if you're not in a relationship. And there is no feeling of separation if your relationship is just casual. The relationship has to be intense. That a good amount of you has to be inside this other person. And the only way you can see your own reflection, you know, and that reflection has to do with, you know, you want these ideas to come to life. And when you're here, you're working in the backyard, it's like your feelings and your thoughts and your mind and your body are one and the same. They're all harmoniously working together. We sit together, we have food together. Once in a while we plow the land together and we talk. You know, and if it's intense enough, they look at you and say, is it okay if we just don't go home? We brought some extra clothes here, we'll just take a shower and we'll see you on campus. And I would say, sure. Because it was like this house becomes an extension of me, and as long as they're here, they continue to have the feeling that they're home, you know. And that's one of the nice things about unity, that you know, human beings are really, really restless for such a huge part of their life. Once in a while we fall in love and you feel at home. Once in a while you grab a book and you open the pages and you read and it just pulls you in and you feel at home. Sometimes you have a good conversation, but these moments are so rare. You know, once in a while you sit and watch a good movie and you can just forget everything. And the movie drags you in and you're one of the characters. Separation is always with pain. Always. There is so much doubt and there is so much fear and there is so much loneliness and despair in separation. You know, when you fall in love with someone, it's like your body is just reserved for that one person. And just in case you lay that body down with another human being, you kind of feel as if something about you has been violated. You hate yourself for having put yourself in that position. When I couldn't reach Hussein, whether it was because I was too shy to call him and say, I want to come over, I would try to find people who were connected to Hussein. One was my mom's cousin, the other Hussein. And they would go there, or I would go there, and I would ask him. And I didn't go there for Hussein, the cousin. I went there because I knew that Hussein would be an extension. He would be an alarm clock. He would remind me of how it feels to be at Hussein's house. I would often ask Hussein to tell me how he met Hussein, and how the relationship evolved. And I wasn't really interested in the story. I just wanted to hear the name Hussein, and I wanted to kind of picture in my mind, the two Husseins meeting each other, talking to each other. I was lucky for the first 10 years because if I couldn't reach Hussein and I felt this pain of separation, I had all these Sufi texts, classical Persian, Arabic. I would sit for hours and read them because they would really be the extension of Hussein's ideas and Hussein's conversations with us. But then you have these moments, Cassie, where there is nothing that can pull you out of yourself and your miserable condition. There is a story about the Indian version of Romeo and Juliet, Layli Majnun, where Majnun is in the desert, he's walking, he's lost. Layli is going to be married to someone else, and there's a guy in the middle of the desert. He has his prayer rug out, he's praying, and Majnun, without noticing him, just walks on his prayer rug, and this old man gets really, really angry. He says to him, what is wrong with you? Have you no shame? Can't you see me praying? And Majnun looks at him and says, I keep thinking about my woman. I couldn't even see you. The pain has blinded me. And you say you were praying. You were only supposed to think of God or truth or whatever. And yet, you saw me, and I wonder who is really praying, me or you? In separation, you feel as if you are in a desert, that there is no nourishment out there, that there are no shades, there are no oases. You're just stranded in the middle of nowhere. You can't do much. You have no power. I think this line from Rumi, that دردی است غیر مردن کان را دوا نباشد پس من چگونه گویم که این درد را دوا کن. I can't say this is true for everyone, and since this is Rumi's poem, maybe he's just talking about himself. Once you're exposed, once you're in love, once you find a teacher, once this teacher transforms you, once there is intimacy, something about you has forever changed. Now, it doesn't mean that you won't forget once in a while. You will. And you will go back to life and you will do whatever. But then it comes up. And as you get older, you know, it refuses to go down. And you feel guilty and you feel ashamed for, I think, the way you've just spent time. That there is this pain, dardi is غیر مردن, that there is this pain that nothing can remedy. Only through death can this pain go away. So how can I ask anyone to cure this pain that I have? I think if you've been exposed to these ideas, and if you've been exposed to if you've had an experience that has opened certain parts of you, and it was like a gift, you're going to have many days where you feel this separation. And I don't think there is anyone or anything that can help it, except the very thing that opened it. The only thing you can hope for is you know, I was very lucky in the sense that there came a point where I no longer missed Hussein. And because I no longer missed Hussein, he didn't have any parts of me inside him that I was looking for. He wasn't anymore the person who had parts of me in him. I could find what I was looking for in books, in a couple of other teachers I was working with at the time. The feeling of separation is very healthy, Cassie. Despite all the pain and the discomfort it brings about. It makes sure that you don't have fun. You know, this idea that the Naqshbandis have. Hoosh dar dam. Hoosh means being aware. Dam means breath or the moment. Hoosh dar dam. There is something about pain that keeps you awake. There is something about pain that makes you aware and reminds you. But should separation happen, we should always remember Hafiz's poem. یوسف گم گشته باز آید به کنعان غم مخور کلبه احزان شود روزی گلستان غم مخور ای دل غم دیده حالت به شود دل بد مکن بین سر شوریده باز آید به سامان غم مخور گرد و روزی دور گردون بر مراد ما نرفت دائما یکسان نماند دور گردون غم مخور that there is this Joseph or Yusuf within you that's beautiful, and once in a while you hold it. But going back to Gurdjieff, life doesn't like people to be reminded of Joseph within. Life wants to make sure that people remain asleep, that people remain unaware of the Joseph, that their evolution really is just they're born, they live out their life, and they die. Joseph is you have to dive deep into this well, but you're not going to dive unless you feel as if what you're looking for lives down there in this dark pit. And this separation, the more you love, the more intense is the experience of separation, and you're going to cry. As Hafiz tells us in that particular poem, you're going to cry and cry and cry until you become blind. And you're not going to be interested in anything. And when you're blind, you just sit and you just pray. And you begin to look for unification, not so much through your senses, but through your sense of smell. I guess that's what the Indians would say, the nose of your nose. That you have this spiritual nose now that awakens. And you begin to sniff around and see if you can find the path that you've lost. Ultimately, of course, the poem argues that be patient, endure, suffer in silence, suffer with a good amount of maturity. Eventually what you have lost will be given to you. I sent Stacy these links to these houses in Nevada City. 5 acres, 10 acres, one of them 15 acres, for half the price of Helen's. But when we gathered at Helen's house, first there was Helen herself. Then there was all the memories created at Helen's place, especially the pavilion. And it was such, a wonderful, beautiful experiences that all of us had over there. That it's not so much about finding a different house that's half the price and maybe the same number of acreages. That property has memories in them, and that's the tragic part. There is so much of you in that property. And that property is like your home. If there is any way you can buy that property, to some extent you can find yourself again. So, I'm sorry, Cassie. Stacy, do you have anything?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you. So sometimes you talk about an encounter with, someone who feels like home, or someone whose life is going relatively well, and they're surprised by the encounter, or it catches them off guard. Like Plato, who has this very kind of blessed life, he's talented, and then he encounters Socrates. He wasn't really maybe searching for someone like Socrates. Then you have people like Irene, who her second husband died. She was involved with the Theosophical Society. She was looking for something. She had been broken by life, maybe in certain ways already, that caused her to search. And she travels all the way to India, of course with certain assumptions of what she would find, but she didn't exactly come across Vaisal just like in the market or something. How do you think it's different for someone like Plato versus someone like Irina, who is doesn't really know what they're looking for, but has gone on a long search to find someone who feels like home?
So Plato is very young, 17, 18 maybe. Irina is very old. Plato is a young man. Irina is an old woman of 50. Plato doesn't have much life in him, and therefore could easily be inspired and brought to excitement. Irina, on the other hand, as you said, perhaps she was hopeful in her first marriage because it was her first that didn't work out too well. She married a second husband. Maybe she grew to love him, but she certainly didn't go into the second marriage because she fell in love. You know, it's kind of like Sophia Loren, that she had lots of people proposing her, but because she was an actress, because she had seen how actors are, she decided to marry someone who is a lot older than she is, and who was a businessman and he was solid, you know. So Irina also assumed that she knows what the spiritual quest is all about, what it means to have a teacher, what it means to be a student, what religion is, what God is, all those things. She also had friends with whom she talked about, you know, these ideas. So if one was to go back to Gurdjieff, one could say that Irina had a lot of personality to her simply because she was so much older and she had so much life in her, whereas Plato didn't. Plato didn't have much to overcome because he was so young and because he was so privileged. And I suppose you could say that he, very much like Irina, kept a diary that later on became the dialogues, you know. And when you read through the pages of Daughter of Fire, every page there are like 10, 15 instances of Bhai Sahib's name. You know, Bhai Sahib said this and Bhai Sahib said that, and I'm so angry at him because of ABCD. And the dialogues of Plato are no different in the sense that, you know, for 1,000 pages, if not more, Plato speaks through the mouth of Socrates. You have no idea who's talking really. The assumption is it's just Socrates. So what you have in both cases is that you have Plato as well as Irina Tweedy both having fallen in love or become enamored by one Socrates, the other by Sahib. Plato worked with a man, whereas Irina worked with Baisahib worked with a woman. So you have the differences. A man teacher working with a female student, whereas for Plato you have a man teacher working with a young male student. There is a great amount of, I think, intense and conflicting set of feelings that exists in a man-woman relationship as opposed to a man-to-man, even though for the Greeks at that time homosexuality was an okay thing. So you could say that to some extent it was a love affair of sorts between Plato and Socrates, maybe even in physical form. When you look at the dialogues of Plato, it's very rational, it's very logical, it's very step by step. It's very entertaining to see how Socrates or Plato wrestles with someone and conquers them through rationality. Irina's story is a little different, first because again she is 50 and she has a lot of life and she has a lot of assumptions. And there is so much that she needs to overcome. And there is so much abuse that she has to take in ways that I don't think Plato did. And I don't think Socrates he didn't have the Baisahib temperament, You have to forgive me because I forgot your question.
It seems like people are broken. Some people are broken before they meet a teacher of sorts. Maybe broken by life. And I don't know if it's being broken by life that sends them on a journey, or just the way that they came out. They were meant to have this kind of life. I don't know. And some people are intact until they meet a teacher who breaks them. And I'm just wondering how the paths are different.
I think all of us are broken by life in some shape or form, but it depends to what extent you have been broken. Sometimes sometimes you're broken and there is no way that you could be put back together. And I think it's only the young and the hopeful teachers who assume that they have magical powers of sorts, and by that I mean a lot of patience, and these ideas have the potency and the power to kind of change and transform someone. I don't think that's true. I think it's only because you're young, sometimes you take your car to a mechanic and he looks at you and says, I can fix it, but it's not worth it. Because this other part is broken as well, and that other part is broken as well. My recommendation, the mechanic would say, is sell the car and buy yourself a different one. You know. So some people are broken, and in as much as I think they are very hopeful of getting fixed, and in as much as perhaps if they come across a teacher of sorts, they too become or are hopeful and give hope to the broken person that they can be fixed, I don't think that's the case. Because there is so much, depending again on how broken you are. If you're very, very seriously broken, there is so much that you have to overcome. So much in the way of thinking, so much in the way of feeling, so much in the way of habits, so much in the way of routines, so much in the way of... You know, one of the things about transformation is what we call som. Som means... It's kind of like the Gurdjieffian stop exercise. It means to be quiet. One of the difficulties of being quiet, and I don't mean like keeping your mouth shut. If you've been in the habit of thinking about yourself, about life, about things in a certain way, some means that has to come to a stop. If your temperament, or perhaps the way you feel, which is again habitual, if it's something that your feelings are tools with which you color the experiences of the world, that too has to stop. And so it's really, really, really difficult to make your habit stop for a long period of time, and in as much as you're tempted to express the way you have always been expressing yourself, there is I think, a moment where you break, where you say, you know what, I'm tired of not being able to express myself the way I usually do. So you kind of relapse and go back to the old habits. So that's the first thing, that some people who are broken, they're just not fixable, you know. I think if you're just casually broken and you accidentally run into someone, Cassie was 17. She had no boyfriend, she had no girlfriend, she had no friends, really. She didn't have a life. I mean, I don't really know, I'm just saying, you know. Her life was not very busy at all, you know. If on the other hand, someone who's been casually broken by life, and all of us have been broken by life, hopefully in a not so serious way, and we're just minding our own business, you know, but you happen to be like, I don't know, 25 or 35 or 40, and you live your life in a certain way. You have a companion, maybe you have children, maybe you have a job, maybe like Irina, you have your own assumptions about how things should be and the way they should be done. Then you run into, say, a Socrates or a Bhai Sahib. Now, going back to our conversation about separation and union, you really do have to spend a lot of time with this so-called Socrates, for Socrates to take more and more space inside you. So you think less about your life, and you think less about your passions, and you're less engaged with all the things that have occupied you for the past like 10, 15, 20 years. And so, you know, that wristband that sometimes people wear, what would Jesus do, for example? And it's an interesting thing, because should Socrates occupy more space inside you, everything that you do is, what would Socrates do? You know, how would Socrates wash dishes? How would Socrates cook? How would Socrates talk? How would Socrates dress? But for that to happen, you have to spend a lot of time with this person, which means that you have to take away spending time with other things in your life. Now, unless your life is busy but you are depressed in it, that you're just going with the flow, but deep down you're really like hemorrhaging and you're really suffocating, because you have the awareness and the mindfulness to know that your life is not going anywhere. And though on the outside you look functional, on the inside you're dead. مرده میروم بر روی خاک زنده گردان جانم جان بخش پاک. That everybody looks at me and they see me laugh, they see me do this, they see me do that, but what they don't really realize is that deep down, really, I am in despair, I am dead, I am just a corpse. The problem with having a relatively healthy, busy life is that you fall in love with a Socrates or a Bai Sahib, and your life disappears for a while. Now, one of the things about falling in love with a Socrates or a Bai Sahib is that the nature of love that you're going to experience, it's going to be very, very, very intense. It's kind of like self-drive. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to make any sacrifices. You don't need to be willful. This force of love, this passion that lives in it, just drives you, and you're willing to sacrifice. Now, the thing about this particular love is that its shelf life is not going to be very long. Okay, and should someone like a Bai Sahib or a Socrates not be an emotional junkie, in the sense that their task is not to just have emotions about you, but their task is to have you understand certain fundamental things. The problem with that is that you make all these sacrifices because of eros. When it comes to this love in the stage of philo, is that this love needs to be transformed. It needs to be matured. It needs to be seasoned into obligation, responsibility, and commitment. And that's going to be tough, because in commitment, I was watching some YouTubes of Cristiano Ronaldo, and he said there are days that I just don't want to practice. There are days I don't want to work my body. There are days I don't want to do A, B, C, D. And once in a while, that's fine if you want to give your body a break or your mind a break. But you have to be disciplined. That even though there are days where you say, no, I don't feel like doing this, you will do it because you're committed to your craft. The problem with the philo part is that you have to be committed to a Plato or a Socrates or a Bai Sahib. The problem with the commitment in this area, the spiritual quest, is that you may be committed to the person, but you don't really know what the outcome is going to be. So this commitment is going to come with a lot of doubts, a lot of skepticism, a lot of fear. And you're going to second guess yourself. You're going to one day do, 2 days not do, 5 days do, 25 days not do. So if your life happens to be busy, but deep down you're in despair, then should an encounter take place, you will no doubt have the capacity to love a Plato or a Socrates or a Bai Sahib. That goes without question. Whether or not you will evolve into the station of discipline and discipleship, that's a different story. Because now you have to make sacrifices, and it's going to be difficult. And it's not so much sacrifices on the outside, but sacrifices on the inside. The common denominator between someone being broken by a teacher versus someone just haphazardly running into someone and have that person break them, is that the common denominator is love. Is the fact that they are going to be enveloped and consumed by these intense emotions they won't really understand. They don't really understand it as much as they try to. And they are guided by it. You know, teachers are like parents. They really do give you all that they have. They give you the best of, what they have. And there comes a point as you leave your parents and you go out there and you form your own relationships and you create your own life. And then you have to sit back once in a while and witness some awful mistakes you've made, despite having had great parents and having had great tools given to you from them or by them. You will make mistakes. I think regardless of how you encounter a teacher, this teacher is like an umbrella or a shelter. They will protect you for a limited amount of time. And at a certain point, you will either realize they have nothing more to give you, or they realize that they have nothing to give you. Eventually you have to part ways, if you're that unlucky. At this stage in my life, I've come to realize that if you're able to stay with a teacher for the rest of your life, you're very, 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 very lucky, and you've been blessed enormously, because you don't have to go out there looking for a crutch. You don't have to go out there looking for a shelter. You don't have to go out there looking for someone or something to worship. You don't have to look for a GPS. It's there. And you love passionately, intensely, and you're devoted. It's such a gift. Aristotle had once said that the best teachers are those who make students teachers, or it may be a great disservice to a teacher to remain a student for the rest of your life. I think Aristotle is wrong. Because what you want to do as a student is you want to mimic your teacher. You want to have what he or she has. You want to do the way he or she does business, whatever that craft may be. And you will never know how good you are until you walk away and you begin to do your own life. And then you begin to realize the insufficiencies. Yusuf sleep? Are? Mary's out? It's I've said this, I think. I've certainly said this to Sarah, but I think in our gatherings as well. At Sac State, when we were with David had a friend. She was a student of his for a while, and then she went to India. She found a teacher in India. She eventually got a full-time position in philosophy and humanities in, I think, Yuba College. Her name was, I don't know what her name was. And David eventually broke ties with her because he demanded that she disconnect from that teacher in India, and she refused. She said, but I love the guy, and he guides me in all sorts of different ways, and I want to remain in touch with him. And David kept pushing her to become more autonomous, more independent, you know. You know, Yusuf and Sophia don't really understand where money comes from. You know, and for someone like me as an immigrant who had nothing, went to the church to get canned food so we can survive, working graveyard, you know, delivering Sacramento Bee every morning at 3 in the morning with our bicycle, rain, wind, Davis, you know. Now, in the eyes of a child, because your parents have money, you don't think twice about money. You don't know the value of money, okay? But you have it nevertheless. And then one day you say to yourself, you know what, I want to leave my parents, and I want to go somewhere, and I want to live my own life, and I want to get my own job, and I want to make my own money, and I want to pay my own rent. And I also want to hang out with my friends, and I also want to be creative, and I want to dance, and I draw, and I do this and do that. And then they go into life, and they realize, you know, paying $2,000 for rent, you need 2 jobs. One job isn't enough. And then you also need to go to school, and you realize, well, by the time you get home from your work, you have no energy for school. And then once in a while, you kind of say to yourself, maybe I should go back home and stay with my parents. There, it's rent-free. They do laundry for me. They cook for me. They clean for me. And I can spend my time doing things that I love. When I was going to Hussein, I didn't know about how someone could be a conduit to wisdom. That we just go there, we sit, they bring us tea. He says to us, what do you guys want to talk about? We say this question, we say that question, and this guy just talks and talks and talks and talks for the next like 5-6 hours. And we are all inspired. And we feel at home. No one is bored, no one falls asleep. And that goes on for 10 years. Okay? Now, if you happen to have khurde shisha inside you, and in Persian it means if you have false ego about you, where you say, I want to be like him, I want to be like Hussein, I want to have my own gathering, I want to, you know, some of the things that some of the people who used to come here would always say. So at a certain point you realize that, well, you don't really want to go to Hussein's house anymore. And now you say, okay, well, I don't want to go there anymore, and I don't want to listen to him talk. But where do I go to find inspiration? What book do I read? Who do I have a conversation with? Now, for the past 10 years, I imagined all of this to be very, very, very easy. But it wasn't, you know. And sometimes I say, man, you know, if I could find someone, or one of the things I regret is that because I didn't know, I didn't have the experience, I didn't value my time with Hussein. I didn't value the gatherings. Even beyond that, even when we had music gatherings for the next 20 years, all of us getting together, having food together, doing small chit chats and then turning off the lights and setting up the music stuff and then singing for the next 2-3 hours. You know, you said you must have liked people that for 20 years you guys gathered, you know. So I think it's always good to be broken, whether like me you had a triple bypass, or you're with a Bai Sahib sorts or a Socrates sorts, where your teacher is really, really experienced by having made a lot of mistakes, by having like killed a lot of people on the surgery bed, you know. That they know the complexities, they know the dangerousness of all of this. And so they move slowly and they move hopefully the right pieces and they make sure that, yes, you came whole, now you're broken, and they need to protect that brokenness. And they don't relish in it because they know how difficult it is. You know, the encounter, Sarah, the kids and I this morning went to this breakfast place. Just the night before last night, we were talking about this young man who's homeless. He walks around College Avenue. He's got the bluest eyes. And he has such a handsome face. And I've always had this like ridiculous feeling that he's a sociologist in disguise. He's just trying to like research society and how mean-spirited people are, how kind and generous they are. And so we had to wait for about 45 minutes to get a table. And lo and behold, we go to the back of this place to sit and wait our turn, and there is this man. The man I've been seeing for like, I don't know, once in a while for the past maybe 10, 15 years. And I remember from the very first time I saw him, I went to him and I asked, will you allow me to get you anything? And he would always say no. And I saw him this morning and I wanted to go to him and say the same thing, even though, you know, he had rejected my many offers in the past. And though the encounter was there, I no longer had the interest. And maybe it's because I knew what the outcome is going to be. I no longer had the patience. 15 years ago, I didn't have children. Now I do, which means that my brain space is now filled with other things. And I looked at his pants today and they were new. And I looked at his bags and they were torn and they were taped up. And there was such an intense desire inside me to want to go and sit next to him and just sit next to him. So out of desperation, I did something a little bit more strange, which is I put some piano music, loud enough for him to hear. So maybe he could look my direction and maybe our eyes could meet and I could nod my head and he could nod in return. But his eyes were closed, and he was eating this bar that was like some healthy snack. And I was going to, when we got our table, I was going to go and ask him if he wanted some pancake. Then I said to myself, there's a reason why he was eating that healthy snack. He knows he's single, he knows he's homeless, and he needs to make sure that he remains healthy and not so sick, because then there is no one out there to take care of him. What is he going to do if he gets sick? And so I just decided not to go. And I suppose the point I'm trying to make is, all of us have these encounters that inspire us to move forward, to be in the presence of the thing that has inspired us. But our own assumptions, our own lives, maybe our own shame, something about our life just hinders us, obstacles us, and we kind of turn around and go away. One of the things I've always liked about Gurdjieff he would always call people 10 minutes before they would have a gathering to see whether or not they have enough interest and passion to drop everything and go to his house or go to his place and listen to conversation. And I think that is really the mark of a really, 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 really good teacher. And in many ways, I think I'm very lucky, because when I met Hussein, he was too young to know the value of time, and he was too young to value his energy, his youth. He could have done so many different things with it, but because he was young, because perhaps he didn't know, or because perhaps he didn't have other interests, maybe he was under the false illusion that, he could change any of us, that he gave us so much of his time and so much of his life. There are two participants. There is the teacher and there is the student. You don't know what you get as a student, and you don't know what you get as a teacher. They're all revealed to you in time. If you want to know whether or not the people you're spending time with are worth your time, you just have to continue spending time with them until you either get tired, you get old, or you see something you don't like about them, and then you kind of just close shop. And it's something that, when David sent us that ridiculous email of his many, many years ago, what I didn't get, I still don't like the tone of his email. What I didn't understand was that here's a 60-some-year-old man who spent 40 years of his life in the classroom, and he had an open door policy, and he spent a lot of time with people. When he sent us that email, he was sick, his wife was sick, they were both in bed for a couple of days, and he was just exhausted. Cassie and Carolyn perhaps they had emailed David at the wrong time as well, demanding things from him, and he just didn't have anything to give. And I asked him for a letter of recommendation, and he had nothing to give to me either. So he just kind of sent this email to us, blasting all of us into oblivion, saying, don't ever contact me, don't ever look at me. Remember that scene in The Matrix where Thomas Anderson is like us, he's waiting for this man who could make dreams into reality, Morpheus. And then after passing some tests, making sure that he continues to live in room 101, that he knows how to live with conflict. He knows how to pretend in metacortex. He knows how to go to the parties, and yet not be engaged in them, always stand in the background, looking at people, observing them, making fun of them, but never getting involved because you know that they're just stupid. That he's going to send Trinity, and he wants to know whether or not he's going to find himself attracted to Trinity. And eventually he's going to get a call from Morpheus, and Morpheus says, well, let's meet. Now that's an encounter because Morpheus is someone he's been looking for all of his life. And eventually Morpheus, offers him 2 pills. There is your life and there is nothing wrong with it. You can go back to bed and you can wake up and you can think whatever, and there's nothing wrong with that. Or you can take the red pill and you can see how far this stuff goes. Now you don't really know as Morpheus if your student, they are filled with doubt if they're going to take the red or the blue. You have no idea. You have no idea if some of the tests you put them through, if they're going to bite, if they're going to succeed, The encounter is not a big thing. You know what you read in the introduction? Right time, right place, right people. You can encounter a teacher, but it may be the wrong time, your life is busy. When Jacob Needleman was still teaching, I remember going to his office and then going to his house all the time. Then we lost touch, and I ran into him maybe 10 years later at Lakeshore. I went to him and said, Mr. Needleman, kind of just, go away, go away. He was old now, It was no longer the time for him to encounter a student, train a student. So much of all of this is just luck. You know, it's nice to read a book like that. And the assumption is there's a science behind it. It's just luck, a lot of luck. You know. To be lucky enough to have parents, to be lucky enough to have children, to be lucky enough to have a companion, to be lucky enough to have lots of money, to be lucky enough to run into a teacher, to be lucky enough to fall in love with a teacher, to be lucky enough where this doubt, you know, comes to you full force, telling you to leave this person, but you love this man too much, and so you say intuition or rationality. Your reason says leave, your intuition says stay. Which one are you going to do? Well, it's luck. It really is a lot of luck. You know, Malcolm X was broken by life. I mean, in a very severe way. But he was magic. You know, maybe he was desperately looking for a father in Elijah Muhammad. Maybe he was just ready. You know. Cassie, anything?
Are you sure you're not too tired?
Yeah.
I'm not sure it's okay to ask these
Hmm?
questions. Or,
Everything's okay, Cassie.
I guess I'll ask it sort of in relation to your experience, but maybe you might prefer to talk about it in a more general way, but you know, you were talking a lot and have talked a lot about, you know, being broken by a teacher. And I'm wondering whether in your experience or just in general, eh, were you put back together before you left Hussein, by Hussein? Or was that something that happened after you left Hussein?
So the first thing about, you know, getting broken, forgive my ridiculous example or analogy. Your life has some hiccups in it, but for the most part, it's okay. And you're just a kid. For me, I was like an 18-year-old kid, just running around, you know, playing soccer, playing tennis, going to school, taking some ridiculous classes. And I have a lot of friends, despite all the confusion that live inside me. This man comes and begins to introduce me to some ideas. Initially, you know, some people experience these ideas in a very intense and raw way, very, very immediately. And for some people, it's a gradual process. For me, it was gradual. It took about 6-7 months. And they kind of work like thief at night, you know, little by little, every day, every meeting, every gathering. A tiny bit goes inside you, and you don't even know it's inside you, but they're like seeds, you know. And once in a while you think about them, once in a while you feel about them. And then, you know, one sprouts here, the other sprouts here, and before you know it, there is this, like, a forest inside you with all these ideas. So after 7-8 months, you become curious. I mean, you become interested. And you don't know why. All you know is that, you know, this stuff is interesting. I don't know why they're interesting, but they're interesting. You know. But you still lack the etiquette. You just don't know how to be around Hussein. You ask silly questions. You sit in like disrespectful ways. You say sometimes disrespectful things. But he sees that you're interested and you are interested. And as your interaction with this man becomes more, you become more introverted. I mean, that's a really awful place to be, because the sort of animals that we are, you're trying to always be on the outside, be engaged with life. Life can be a wonderful GPS, you know. And Hussein and the ideas that he was presenting, slowly they begin to ruin your interaction with all the things that are out there, with your parents, with your friends, with music, with tennis, with soccer, with yourself, all the things that you used to be interested. You know, it's like you had this history and it's gone now. You know, and you don't know what to do with this like empty space. And without impressions, without images, without purpose, you just get lost, you get sad, you get depressed, you know. And add to it that you begin to read all these books in Persian, and all these poetry and all these Sufi texts and all these, you know, difficult ideas about human beings, about life. And so you become even more introverted. The problem is, well, your brother is there, your sister is there. You work at the car wash, you have all these people coming to you saying, would you like to go have a dinner? Would you like to go have coffee? And they're attractive. And there's a part of you that says, yes, I really want to do those things. And then there is this other part of you that intensely begins to punish, you know. And you begin to kind of become angry at those who are actually able to enjoy themselves in life. You say, well, I want some of that. You know, I want to be happy like that. I want to, you know, make school work for me. I want to like be in a relationship. But no. You know, you grow your hair long, you grow your beard long, you begin to wear baggy clothes. And, you know, you wake up in the morning with a sense of purpose. You want to do A, B, C, D, but these ideas make life meaningless. You know, nothing matters. And then you begin to self-inflict by asking, why am I alive? You know. So it's important to understand that when we talk about being broken, you know, sometimes that bathroom over there is broken, you can use this bathroom. Sometimes, you know, this car is broken, you can use this other car. But these ideas and someone like Hussein, they make every part of life broken. There is nothing in life you can go to find rest and to find comfort. There is nothing out there. And all there is just Hussein. Even though most of the things he talks about are just inspiring, but really for the most part dark and gloomy, he is your only salvation. There is no other place in life you can go. The only comfort you can find is reading some gloomy poetry, that human beings don't really belong down here. ما بدین ره نه پی حشمت و جاه آمده ایم، از بد حادثه اینجا به پناه آمده ایم. That we didn't come down here because it was fun, it was interesting, or we were very curious. A calamity, a misfortune, bad luck, you know. And it takes life does this wonderful thing that in a very organic, natural way, it creates history inside you. You interact with your parents, that's history. You interact with people who eventually become your friends. You interact with TV shows where you watch 20 seasons of whatever, You interact with going to a park, The history makes you you. These ideas erase everything. Everything. It's like the salmon fish who says, I'm just leaving. I don't belong here. But you've been here for 20 years, that may be so. I can't be here anymore. But I'm your wife, or I'm your husband, I'm your kid. I don't really care, But what about your job? What about your money? What about your house? It doesn't really matter. Where are you going to go? I don't really know. Well, you're going that direction. Do you know where you're going? No. Where's your GPS? I'm going to follow my intuition. Well, has it not deceived you in the past, your feelings? Yeah, how can you trust it now? I don't really know. All I know is that this life that I've been living for the past 20 years, it just doesn't work anymore. Now, people around you who love you, who take care of you and care for you, they do so many things in so many different ways to make you feel comfortable, to make good food for you, My aunt, my poor aunt, we went to Italy some years ago, and to this day, she says, Amir, you didn't really like the place, did you? I said, Mali, it was such a wonderful place. Amir, you don't like anything. Don't lie to me. You didn't like going to Italy. I said, Mali, I loved it. Do you want to go again? Yeah, you're lying to me. These are people who care for you, but they also know that you're like this big, dark, gloomy cloud, and every time you go anywhere, there are these heavy conversations you want to have. And so that's what I mean by, someone breaking you. Now, one of the nice things about having a teacher is that it's not that he can put your brokenness back together, is that your brokenness finds meaning, finds home in his physical space. There isn't much he can do. The brokenness, if I was at my parents' house, it would be loud. I would be in my room, the lights would be off, my room was black, and I was sleeping on the floor. It's loud. And when my parents would call me down for dinner, I would talk to no one. I would be sad, I would be gloomy, I would be dark. My parents' house could not hold my brokenness the right way. In fact, what it did, it imposed itself on my parents. It made them worry, it made them sad, it made them angry that here's their son. Here are these parents who migrated, left everything to take care of their kids. They come here, but their kid is unreachable. It's kind of like this scene in Herman Hesse's Siddhartha, where the father looks at, Siddhartha and comes to realize that, yes, his son is physically there, but he's gone. He no longer has a son. So he goes to him and says, what are you doing here now? Go away. Go do whatever you want to do. Just go to your mom and tell her that you want to be a monk. So go out there. If you find something, come teach it to me. If you find nothing, just come and we'll do the Upanishads together. And so when you go to Hussein's house, what just happens is your brokenness quiets down. That's all that happens. And it finds home in the poetry he gives you, in the commentary of the Quran he gives you. And you realize, well, Mehrdad sitting next to you, he's also broken. The other Hussein is broken. And your teacher Hussein, is talking about brokenness through all these different mediums. Okay. Then for the first, I think, few years, the brokenness is like this cut that's fresh. The blood is oozing on a daily basis, and the pain is fresh, the cut is fresh. It hurts you all the time. Then something interesting happens, which is as eventually you become very intimate with cancer, and as you begin to deal with cancer in a very mature way, initially it's a lot of yelling and screaming and blaming and fighting and maybe sad and depressed and unreachable. There comes a point where you say, you know what? Okay, I have cancer. There are lots of people who are sick. There are lots of people who are not lucky enough to live to their 60s. You know, there are lots of people who don't have this or who don't have that. I have lived a relatively good life, a relatively rich life. Okay, so I have cancer. You know, now I'm going to deal with it in a different way. After you've gone through all those stages of grief, then you kind of get yourself up and you do the best you can with this particular disease. And just in case your wife comes, your husband comes, your kids come, or your parents come, your friends come, and they realize you really have no need to be comforted. You know that you're going to die. You've made peace with life. You've made peace with death. And you're okay with all the mistakes you've committed in life. And, you found a way to apologize to all people you've transgressed. Okay. There comes a point where you say, you know what? I'm broken. Okay. Now, what usually happens in your brokenness, because there is so much pain and grief and loss in it, and there is a sense of abandonment, there is a great amount of isolation and despair. And everybody works with a different timetable. Some people 5 months, some people 5 years, some people 50 years. So no one knows. Okay? For every person it's different. Now at a certain point, as you come to accept and become intimate with cancer, and now cancer is your friend because it becomes a source of wisdom. Now you tell your kids how to value time, how to value money, how to value friendship, how to value their parents, for example, all those things. You use this particular brokenness to kind of share this cancer, to share your wisdom, your insights, your battle with this disease with other people. There comes a point where you say, okay, I'm broken, but you don't really fully understand it. You still don't understand it. You have all these wisdom and insight about you and about life and about your relationship with life. But they're murky, they're foggy. Now, because of the way you speak about this brokenness, you sound very attractive to other people. Other people understand that life breaks them. Other people understand that life is filled with struggle and pain and disappointment and betrayals. But no one is able to really articulate this stuff really well. But if you have been broken, and if you have been broken in a very educated way, someone tells you to read books about what it means to be broken, how you were broken and why you were broken, and how you can get yourself out of it, okay? As you begin to learn the language, it's kind of like any craft. You go to an interview for a dean's position, you know the buzzwords, And so when people sit next to you and they talk about life, once in a while they say, so Amir, or whoever, what do you think? And now you begin to talk. and everybody like just they sit there, they look at you and say, "Wow, this is beautiful," and they say, "Wow, how could someone in their 20s have so much wisdom?" Well, they really don't. A 20-year-old does not have wisdom. A 20-year-old is just broken and knows how to express certain things in a nice way. That's all. Okay. And so you get into romantic relationships, or you get into any kind of a relationship. Now you think it's solid. The problem is because you are broken, there is nothing solid about you. You're really, really flimsy. You will destroy any life that comes your way. Because by this time, intuitively, you don't really understand it yet. Okay? The assumption is that you can make any relationship work because you have all these like bumper stickers in your head, but nothing can survive. Every person who comes into your life, you damage them without knowing and without wanting to, but you damage them. Okay. If your lifestyle allows you to express all the things you've gone through, little by little, you're able to articulate what lives inside you, you express them outwardly. That in itself has a profoundly healing quality to it. The other thing about brokenness is that it brings with it a great sense of humility, and it's very, very mature. It's not a false humility. It's not like going to the classroom saying, "I don't know anything about the New Testament and yet I have to teach this class." You don't talk like that. There is something about the way you speak. There is something about your body language. There is something about your facial expression. Humility oozes out of it, and it's not because you want to express this humility towards other people. You're standing before your craft and you realize you're way, way small. Okay? By the time you get to a place where you've talked about this brokenness in religious, philosophical, creative, artistic ways, your skin has grown really, really thick. You know how to live with this. And you just wait. And you just wait. And you just wait. And you wait like the way you wait for cancer. That there comes a point where you make peace with it. با درد بساز چون دوای تو منم با کس منشین که آشنای تو منم. Live with your brokenness. با درد بساز چون دوای. Live with your brokenness because brokenness is your medicine. با کس منشین. Why do you sit with strangers? People who don't know you. Sit with your friend. Brokenness. Brokenness has been with you from the moment you're born. Especially since you've met your teacher, for example. Sit with brokenness. What has happened when you sat with your brokenness in the past? You played music. You wrote poetry. You turned off the lights and you wept. It's a gift. The more creative you are with it, I think the better you can deal with it and survive it. Now that also is luck. My own experience, Cassie, is I didn't know if I was to walk into the classroom and when I open my mouth, how it's going to come out. You know, if I'm going to freeze, if when I open my mouth, icicles are going to come out and people are going to find themselves bored and go to sleep. Or, you know, it's going to come out very passionately and intensely. You know, no one knows. But nobody has the power to put you back together. The only thing anyone can do is break you, shelter you, and help you walk with brokenness, hold your hand until they come to realize, yeah, you can cross the street and now you look to your left, you look to your right, you can do this on your own, you know. Now that doesn't mean that just in case you have to carry a cane or a crutch or a walker for the rest of your life, that you don't know how to deal with brokenness. No. I think some people are lucky to be broken and to express this brokenness in a way that is creative. Some people are not that lucky. They're just there to live with the brokenness and they do the best they can. Sometimes it's suffocating, you know, sometimes it's depressing. And that's just the way things are, you know. I don't know who this poem is by. There is this man by the name of Khosrow Shakibai, if I'm not mistaken. Says, سلام پرسیده بودی که حال ما چطور است همگی خوبیم ولی باور نکن. That you had asked how I am doing. You should know that I'm doing well. Everybody's doing well. But don't believe us. You know. And some people don't have the talent to even say those things. And what I can tell you though, Cassie, is you know, all the books that you read and you try to kind of put the information in your head and then you say, all this information, stupid. At a certain point that information comes to life. I mean, you breathe life into it and you turn them and twist them and you like create this beautiful world with them. You just don't know when it's going to happen, when you're able to connect the dots together. I mean, I remember many times when David used to come to the car wash and I would say, you know, I just want to end it. It's not worth it. And David would just laugh. But all the books I read about death, about suicide, about depression, you know, some of the information I got from those books, they eventually became handy. How? I don't know. You know, they're kind of like yeast. At a certain point, you just kind of fluff up. Hussein was only able to break us and then give us language for that brokenness, and then give us his physical space for that brokenness. That was our shelter for a long, long time. And then we were lucky enough to express all of that through music that you were involved in for 15, 16 years. You know, there is that scene in that movie Jesus of Nazareth when he's been whipped and he has this crown of thorns and he goes back to Pontius and he says, well, what do you have to say to yourself now? He doesn't say anything. And Pontius becomes a little frustrated. He gets up, goes near him and says, well, don't you now have the power to crucify you? And he looks up and says to him, you would have no power over me if it hadn't been given you from above. It takes him a long time to get to a place to tell Judas, whatever it is you want to do, you should do it now. He doesn't do this the first day or the second or the third day. One of the nice things about being broken by a teacher who gives you these huge ideas is that life can only give you superficial scars. Because, if your soul has been broken, that's a deep cut, that's a deep wound. And that deep cut makes all the other cuts irrelevant and insignificant. But you have to wait and wait and wait and wait until magically you just play with your brokenness in a different way. Hussein didn't know what he was doing. Hussein was young. Hussein was 35, 36. Hussein didn't. Anyone under 60 is no good.